Good morning, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to this Torah study from Temple Beth Israel in Longboat Key, Florida. This Torah study for July the 10th is at a very, very difficult and challenging time because we are pre-recording. As we are in the process of pre-recording, we are getting weather reports that are of great concern, and I hope by the time July the 10th comes around, and by the time you see all of this, that we are all safe. I also want to mention that we're in the middle of something else. We don't have to be in Florida to recognize, to feel the intensity of the pain of building that collapsed in Surfside, that the demolition of the rest of the building, that other buildings are being inspected and found to be less than safe. Our hearts go out to everyone concerned. I just want to tell everyone as an announcement in advance, I am in the process of working up some thoughts, basically in the form of an essay, a form of sharing ideas with you, not necessarily in the form of a sermon, which you will hear about after we resume our somewhat normal schedule in August. I need some time to think out some of the enormous issues that we face, and temporarily, and it's just a working title now, when I don't know whether my loved ones are dead or alive, and putting it in a much larger context of Jewish history. This week, we are finishing the book of Numbers. We are reading about allocations of land in the land of Canaan for the people of Israel. One of the challenges was this. I need a map to make this as clear as possible, but think of the people of Israel crossing the Sinai, crossing the Negev, and then turning up north on the other side of the Jordan River, where the kingdom of Jordan is today. Some of the people wanted to stay there. They didn't want to cross over into the land of Canaan. The land was good. They thought it was very promising. And Moses had to work out a compromise with them. The compromise was, okay, if you insist on being here, all right, we'll go along with it. But when we go to war, you have to send your people to support us. And only then will we go along with this. I have understood this as being a message for all periods of Jewish history. For those Jews who do not live in the land, and for most of our history, that has been the majority situation, we need to support our people who are in the land of Israel. And I'm going to give two other examples, one from the book of Esther that I spoke about last week, and one from the Passover Haggadah, which I've also spoken about on many occasions. We like to think of ourselves as being one people. However, we are so divided, it is unbelievable. And if you say, what do we have in common? Jews don't live in the same place. They don't all speak the same language. It's a complex situation that doesn't fit the cubby holes of many patterns of thought. In the book of Esther, when the people of Persia are relieved from the threat of being killed by Haman, they institute a special celebration of Thanksgiving. We know what that is, Purim, and we celebrate it all over the Jewish world and always have. I can't say, hey, my ancestors never actually lived there. They weren't the ones who were saved. We take it upon ourselves as identifying and celebrating and commemorating with everyone, even if we were not there. Similarly, Jews who, let's say, lived far away from Europe during the period of the Shoah still commemorate that Memorial Day that is set aside. And Jews who don't live in Medinat Yisrael, in the state of Israel, can celebrate Israel Independence Day. Our sense of identity goes beyond where we are actually living and what we personally or our families are suffering or celebrating. Now, my next example is from the Passover Haggadah. It clearly says in a passage that I find so significant that in every Seder I have had to lead or have wanted to lead, whether it's at our home or at a synagogue or elsewhere. I have read this passage in Hebrew and in English. We're not celebrating in the sense of having a seminar in ancient history. We are supposed to identify with those Israelite slaves who left Egypt. It is as if God liberated me. We're not speaking of them. We're speaking of us. We were there in Egypt. And similarly, we are taught that we are supposed to see ourselves as if we, you and I, individual Jews, stood at Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. Not those who are standing here today, but those who aren't standing here today, the book of Deuteronomy says. And the rabbis interpret that to mean the future generations. So where we are dealing in our Torah reading with what might seem to be just the distribution of land and the working out of a compromise, and that's part of being a leader. Moses is a good leader. He knows how to compromise here. He knows he's not going to win by saying it's got to be my way and that's the only way. Working out beyond those practical concerns, we have an approach to Jewish history where we can feel part of and identify with all times, that is throughout history. We can identify with the Exodus from Egypt. We can identify more concretely in the 20th century with those of our fellow Jews who suffered through the horrors of the 20th century. We can celebrate as we celebrate on Purim, even if we would say this is so long ago, even if we were to say our ancestors never lived in Persia, even if we want to say the whole book of Esther is nothing but a novel, that these events never took place, and there are people who say that. But let's say, for sake of argument, they're right. It doesn't matter. We Jews have been faced with annihilation, persecution in so many situations, and we can identify and make that history part of our own. This past week in the United States, there was a special celebration on July the 4th. You don't hear people say, hey, my ancestors came here in the 1920s or 1930s, way after all this happened. Why should I celebrate? Why should I identify with it? It's the same sort of thing. The building of community is identifying with other people, some of whom we could never know because they lived in the ancient past, others that we never knew because of geographical or other distance in the present. So again, reading this week's Torah reading, we could easily get bogged down with the details of who lived where and when. We could get bogged down, and here I don't want to get bogged down, with Moses's leadership, compromise, working things out, almost setting a model for future generations of Jews who lived in multiple places but were concerned about their fellow Jews elsewhere. And it doesn't have to be a Jewish issue alone. There can be sense of identity with your fellow ethnic group, your fellow religious group, your anything whatsoever across time and across space. We Jews are almost a universal people in the sense that we've lived everywhere. Yes, in your memory and my memory and the memory of our grandparents and great-grandparents, we like to think of ourselves, okay, European and American and now modern Israel. But if we turn the clock back 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is not all that long in Jewish history, hardly any Jews lived in what we would now call Christian Europe. The majority of Jews lived in the Islamic world. Iraq used to be the center of Jewish life. The Talmud, which is the classical Jewish text, going beyond limiting us to the Bible, please don't do that. We didn't end in ancient history. The Talmud, which is the classical Jewish text, where does it come from? Where was it written? At Mount Sinai? No. In the land of Israel? No. In Europe? No. But in what is today Iraq, of all things. We were able to take it, to transport it to all corners of the Jewish world. And again, let's just for fun, let our imaginations go as wild as can be. If we were to turn back the clock a little over 100 years or just 100 years, the largest Jewish communities in the world were in what is now Poland, Belarus, Ukraine. The Russian Jewish community wasn't so Russian. It was more Belarus, Ukraine, Lithuania. All right. It could have worked out differently. The Jews could have ended up as a Middle Eastern people, which we were, and could have remained that way. Instead of picking up a form of German and taking it east to us and speaking Yiddish, we could all today be speaking a form of Arabic. And this is not an absurd fantasy. It just didn't work out that way. Or to put it differently, if you think about languages, what language do we speak? One of the most significant changes that is exemplified by what I am doing right now is the use of the English language among the majority of the Jews in the world today. Some have used the expression, the Englishing of Jewish life. It's almost a requirement for political leaders in Israel to be comfortable with English, so they can speak to the rest of the world one-on-one without translators. The fact that Bennett and Lapid both spent significant periods of their lives in the English-speaking world only helps them, as was the case, for example, with Netanyahu. American Jews, more often than not, communicate with their Jewish fellows elsewhere, whether it's in Israel or South America or what used to be the Soviet Union. In what language? English. Yiddish used to be the international Jewish language. Now, whatever language our ancestors who were on the other side of the Jordan spoke, however they understood themselves, whatever part of a larger Jewish world they ever thought they were part of, they were able to settle on the other side of the Jordan in what is today the Kingdom of Jordan. Yes, I know. We're not worrying about claims to land there in the slightest. We're talking about history right now. But they could still be part of a larger Israelite, if I say Jewish, it's anachronistic, but larger Israelite world. I would hope that all of us would recognize that our identity with Surfside, I have yet, and I have to say, it's going to happen, meet somebody who knew somebody who was related to somebody there. I knew people who were in the Twin Towers in New York, one of whom came from Cumberland, Maryland, where I served before I came here, and she was luckily able to escape. I heard the story of how the relatives went to her parents' home and kept them company until they could hear word of her survival. We put this in human terms, not just because they're Jews, not just because we happen to know them, but because there is no other way of understanding human life without trying to identify with those who are going through both suffering and joy. So we commemorate the sad dates in our history. We commemorate the happy dates in our history. We look back on what our ancestors did, and we think of that creativity where it says that I need to view myself as if I myself went out of Egypt. I have to view myself as if I too stood at Sinai. I hope, and I'm speaking in advance because this is pre-recorded, and pre-recorded talks are often very dangerous because you have no idea what's going to happen in the next couple of days. And whether horrible weather is threatening us or not, we still do not know how secure we are. Life is very fragile at its best. But I hope we were all okay and that our pre-recorded session for next week will be available for you. May God continue to protect us through all our ordeals with weather, with politics, and with everything else. Thank you for joining us. Shabbat Shalom. Be safe, be careful, and hopefully we'll see you again very soon. Thank you.